It's almost midnight, guys, but that's not stopping me. Good evening, Internet. This is Olin from What I'm Listening To. It is the day after Christmas, and 2017 is winding down. Pretty soon, it'll be a new year, there'll be a fresh start, and there will be new vlogs on the horizon, and new music and all that kind of fun stuff. And I thought, what better way to end the year than to do an experimental vlog. These are my favorite types of vlogs. I love experimental music and all the different variations of it. I always find the coolest stuff in the experimental section at Amoeba and stuff that's categorized as experimental music. And I love these vlogs because I love sharing them here. I share a lot of music with all my other vlogs, but these vlogs in particular I love so much just because experimental music is my passion. It's the thing I love the most. This will be the 4th experimental vlog. I think it's the best way to end the year, so with that being said, let's get started. Starting things off, the first album I have here is a band called Bong Water. The main guy behind this band is a dude by the name of Mark Kramer, or just simply Kramer. He has worked with numerous artists. He's produced Lowe's first 2 albums. He's released stuff by Daniel Johnston and then another odd band called Fly Ashtray, which I've talked about in the past. So he's pretty well known in the indie rock world. And this actually is the first band he was in. I have known about this band for a while, mostly because I would always see their band name pop up and I always thought, that just sounds so disgusting. I don't want anything to do with it. But over time I learned about Shimmy Disc and Kramer and started listening to his material and thought, okay, I'll give this band a shot. I picked this album up partially because the album is called The Power of Pussy, but mostly because it's probably their best album or their most well-known album. There's a song on here called Folk Song that got a lot of airplay on college radio. Some of their songs are psychedelic and some of them are noisy and some of them are spoken word. It's just very strange and too cool for school, but I love it a lot. So yeah, this is Bong Water. I like this band a lot. I'm gonna have to listen to more of their material as well as more of Kramer's material because he is a very cool musician and really cool band.
I didn't understand the sexual tension that was between me and so many men, so I just sleep with everyone, cause I had to get rid of that sexual tension I didn't understand. But the thing is, I never had an orgasm, no, I never got a bingo, no, not one, no, not with another human.
The next album I have here, I've talked about them in the past. This is a Stars of the Lid album. It's getting to the point where I'm just wanting to collect all of Stars of the Lid's albums. They are absolute champions in the ambient world. Everything they do is magnificent. Their later stuff places more emphasis on classical compositions, but their earlier stuff is much more electronic and dark ambient. This one kind of straddles between the both of them. In fact, this might be the album right before they released the Tired Sounds of Stars of the Lid, which is most likely their most famous album. So there are some classical elements, but there are also some of their electronic older elements. But overall, it's still Stars of the Lid. It's fantastic, beautiful music. I highly recommend checking out any of these guys' album. You will not be disappointed. Their music is fantastic. The next album I have here, this is Lou Reed's Metal Machine Music. This is one of those albums that I've known about before I was even into experimental music. I remember hearing this and thinking, what the fuck is this? This isn't the Velvet Underground. This isn't his other solo stuff that I'm used to hearing. So I just kind of discarded it because I thought this is just way too weird. I can't see myself liking this. But here I am with the album in hand, and I can easily say This is a great album. I like it for a couple different reasons. One, because I love noise music and drone music, and this album is 4 songs that are about 20 minutes each of nothing but noise and feedback that drone forever. But the other reason I like the album is because of how it was released. Although Lou Reed says that this is a genuine artistic recording, releasing an album like this after having a massively successful album produced by David Bowie with radio hits all over the place was kind of like a huge fuck you to the record labels. A lot of his fans were baffled by this. A lot of them returned this album to the stores, but there was a very, very, very small percentage of people who absolutely loved this album, and I am probably one of those people. I urge any fan of drone music to check this album out. This is definitely not an album for everybody, but if you have an open mind towards music, I recommend checking it out. Even just listening to one song off this album is an absolute experience. And if you like what you hear, then listen to the rest of the album, because again, the whole thing is a very noisy but very cool experience. The next 2 albums here come in pairs. These are 2 albums by Lauren Masek Connors. Lauren Masek Connors is a avant-garde guitarist that has been making music since the 70s. Pretty much all the recordings he does are improvised. His style ranges from blues, jazz, noise, but overall it's just very different and yet so interesting. He's been putting out music for a very, very long time, some of which is very hard to find. So anytime I go to a record store, I always see if they carry any of Lauren's work. These are 2 albums of his that I'm happy to have in my collection. This album is called Hoffman Estates. Although it says on the cover it's Lauren Connors and Alan Litch, who's another fantastic guitarist, there's a bunch of other people that are involved in the making of this. Josh Abrams, Kevin Drum, Jim O'Rourke, and many, many others. Because there's so many people involved with this, it's a much bigger sounding album as opposed to his solo recordings, but it's still super weird, and I think it's all improvised on the spot. It's really jazzy at some points, but it's also very noisy and chaotic. It's just cool and interesting, and it's a great album. And then this album is him, another guitarist named Marc-Montera, and Thurston Moore and Lee Ronaldo, both of which are from Sonic Youth. As soon as I saw this album, I snatched it. I love Sonic Youth and I love Thurston and Lee's work. To see them all on one record was a no-brainer. I had to own it. It's only 3 songs, but they're each 10 minutes apiece, one of which is actually 20 minutes. And like that other album, all free improv. It reminds me a lot of Glenn Branca's work, though maybe not as composed, but still very noisy and guitar-driven as Glenn Branca. At this point, I think he's a legend in the experimental world. He's a wonderful musician, and I'm super happy to have these in my collection. Speaking of collaborations, I have a bunch of collab albums, all of which are a part of an album series called The Fish Tank. A Swedish label called Concurrent releases all these albums. They invite musicians to come to their studio and urge them to record anything, but their only stipulation is they have to do it within 2 days. And because of that, all these albums contain a very wide variety of interesting sounding songs. So going down the list pretty quickly here, I have an album, Low and Dirty 3. To joy, I crawl talked about Low before. They're renowned in the slowcore world, and with Dirty 3 they add another element to their music that's much more atmospheric and a lot sadder just because of the electric viola that's there. This one is Sonic Youth and the X all on one album. Much like the Lauren Masek and Connors album, it's free improv, it's kinda jazzy, but it's really chaotic, and it, to me, sounds like they just went into the studio and they thought, okay, let's just bang the shit out of this guitar, or let's pound on this drum and just throw our instruments everywhere, and okay, we're done. And then this is a collaboration between Sparkle Horse and Fenez, who's an electronic producer. I discovered this album when browsing a music board, and somebody made a thread that was albums that are perfect for listening to while gazing into the stars. One of the responses was this album, and what made me actually go and check it out was everybody commented, yes, I agree. I encourage you all to check out this series. I would start with this one, and if you like what you hear, go check out the rest of their albums. There's some fantastic stuff and some fantastic bands that work together. The next album here, this is a band called the Cathedral Orchestra. Talk about drone and noise music. These guys are just that. They sound a lot like Indian music, but just making as much noise as possible and just keeping the noise going for 10 minutes at a time. I discovered this album because of the label that it's released off of, VHF. They've put out tons and tons of great experimental albums. Not to mention the name of it just sounded so interesting, Dabbling with Gravity and Who You Are. A pseudo-deep title, I'm not sure. All I know is this is a very cool album, and it's something to listen to when just wanting to zone out and get lost in the chaos. The next album I have here, this is a group called Borin and their Club of Gore. I would always see this album in the experimental section. Initially, I thought it was a metal record just by the fact that it's completely black, apart from the skull and then the title of the album, Black Earth. So I caved in and I bought the album, and I was actually very surprised to find that it's a much more calm album than I was imagining it to be. It's really, really dark, but it's jazz music. It's really atmospheric and emotional, and it's unlike any sort of jazz music I'd ever heard. It's nothing like the other albums I've shown here. It's not chaotic, it's not noisy. It's the kind of album you put on a rainy evening, maybe just when you're driving through the city by yourself. So I was very pleasantly surprised by buying this album, and now that I know of this band's existence, I'm going to have to buy some of their other material because what I've heard on here is fantastic. Fans of jazz, please check these guys out. I promise you it's not going to be too weird or too obnoxious. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by the material that these guys do. The next album I have here, this is a Franco Battiato album. When I went and saw Gruber perform live in the Mission District of San Francisco, they were playing this really interesting sounding music when they were setting up the equipment for her set. I was really into the song, But it ended, and I thought, damn, I should have Shazammed that so I could have looked up the album. So while Gruber played her set, I kind of had forgotten about it. But as soon as the concert ended, they put the same exact song back on, and that's when I took my moment to figure out what the hell it was. And that was my formal introduction to Franco's music. He's done a lot of different kinds of music, some progressive rock, some kind of poppy music, but this one is much more avant-garde and weird. One of the songs on here has what sounds like those little finger harps that you play. I should say multiple finger harps that are all playing different things, but it creates this really weird atmosphere and somewhat peaceful kind of sounding music. I'm really glad I was able to Shazam this and be able to get it, because I loved hearing it at that venue. It was just a perfect atmosphere, and I am so happy to own this record. And the final item I have here, it would not be an experimental vlog if I didn't show a Flying Saucer Attack album. I thought that I had gotten all of Flying Saucer Attack's albums on vinyl, but I guess I was mistaken, because one day while at Amoeba, I stumbled across this guy here. At first I thought, what the fuck is this? Is this a new album they put out? And as it turns out, it's actually a reissue of the only live record they ever put out. So going back a little bit, Flying Saucer Attack used to tour pretty extensively in the Bristol area. A lot of times when they performed, they wouldn't really play the stuff that they released as singles or stuff from their full albums. They did a lot more improv music. Needless to say, crowds were befuddled by what they were hearing. Some of them were scratching their heads and confused, and others responded negatively, to the point where Dave Pierce thought, I'm done. I'm never playing live ever again. So after that, Dave just lived in the studio and recorded music and put out albums, never playing a show ever again. But there were still recordings from some of those live shows, and they were all put together onto a CD and released as the album In Search of Spaces. So for the first time on vinyl, they repressed it and remastered it and added some more material to it. Needless to say, as the fan I am, I had to own it. The fact that it had unreleased material on it was one thing, but the other reason I was wanting this so badly was because there was a completely new side that they added, where Jim O'Rourke got his hands on some of the recordings and made his own mix of the material. It's some of their most experimental material, but it's still very much them. Noisy, droning, atmospheric, and of course, it's psychedelic as all hell. This is a wonderful album. It's beautifully packaged. I am so excited that they put this on vinyl. I look forward to the day where Dave makes another album, and I look forward to the day when I stumble across another Flying Saucer Attack reissue that I didn't think they would do, but this right here is showing that they're putting out all their music, and people need to hear it. So thank you VHF, and thank you Drag City for doing this. Please keep putting out their music. Everybody needs to hear this band. They are amazing. Okay, internet, that does it for me. I've been recording for way longer than I should, and it's 12:30 at this point, so I should probably go to bed. If you have any albums that you want me to check out, particularly any experimental albums that you like, leave a comment down below, and if I like it, maybe I'll include it in a vlog. But until then, this is Olin from What I'm Listening To, signing out. Goodbye, and good night.
Throw your guns up, throw your guns up.